Well, welcome to the show, everyone. Today I have Renae Bluitt, who is a filmmaker. Her latest film, She Did That, is now streaming on Netflix. The film, which is a documentary, offers up an up-close and personal look at Black women entrepreneurs and addresses topics like the funding gap for women of color and a whole lot of other things. I watched the film and will tell you that I walked away feeling inspired. I cried, I laughed. I thought it was a great film, and I am really excited for you to hear my conversation today with Renae. So we're going to jump right into it. Well, hi, Renae. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's great to have you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
So let me start with this amazing accomplishment. You recently launched your film. It's now streaming on Netflix.
Yeah.
And the documentary. It's a wonderful watch. I watched it last night, and I think it's worth anybody that's listening in to go over to Netflix and to find the show. It's She Did That is the title of the show, and so heartwarming. Such wonderful stories you shared. Can you talk a little bit about how the film came about?
That film is actually over a decade in the making, and I didn't even realize it. I didn't know that there was a film in me, but for the last 11 years now, I've been blogging on the topic of Black women entrepreneurs. I launched a blog back in 2009 titled In Her Shoes. And as I reflect on it, the title and everything was corny, but what I wanted to do was give my readers an opportunity to walk in the shoes of these women who are starting businesses, who are building brands, and just get a look at like what that life is really about outside of what we may see on television or what we were seeing, through social media at the time. So I had a really great experience doing like traditional Q&As. I eventually in 2010 hosted my first live event, which was my way of bringing the blog to life in a conversation. And after, years of doing these interviews and hosting these events, I did a photography exhibition here in New York City, grabbed one of my friends who is an outstanding photographer, and we went around the city and we photographed 25 Black women entrepreneurs in their spaces where they create their magic. And so after that exhibition, people loved it. It was just using a different medium to tell these women's stories. And it was just so awesome to see these women, at this exhibition, kind of looking at their gorgeous pictures and their stories next to it and being able to talk to people in the room about their businesses and what they're up to. So after that night, I was like, what do I do next? How do I top this? Do I do another exhibition? Do I go back to panels? Like, what do I do? So I prayed on it. I meditated on it, and God just planted this seed in my mind to create a documentary. And so ignorance is bliss, because I had no clue what I was walking into. In New York City, you're literally just 1 degree of separation from, the greats. I had people around me who were already in the film industry or television industry. And I got to talk to some amazing people about this idea I had, and it felt very possible. I never once said to myself, you've never produced a film, why do you think you can? Being in this city and just talking to all the different women who were building these brands, who may not have been like formally trained in what they were doing, it literally gave me the audacity to say, I'm going to create this film. So I put a very awesome team together, and they helped me bring the vision to life. So when I think about what inspired the film, it is absolutely the blog, which I started in 2009 without, any major intentions behind it. When I started the blog, it wasn't to like monetize it. It wasn't to become an influencer, because in 2009, you know, influencer wasn't even a word that we were using. I literally had the purest intentions. It was just to tell these Black women's stories, because at that time, there weren't many platforms for us to share our stories. So I was filling a void.
Yeah. I love that, you know, when you call yourself in the film, you call yourself a storyteller. And I love that idea that, you know, you are here to kind of help share these women's inspiring stories.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I know you cover when you talk when in within the film is you talk about the fact that African American women are starting businesses at significantly higher rates than the national average, and that there is an enormous amount of momentum. What do you think is driving that?
There are a few things driving it. So to just go to the stat that you mentioned, at the time that we filmed that segment, the stat was that African American women were starting businesses 6 times the national average. Prior to the pandemic, it was 10 times the national average. And so there are a few things behind that. One is just, and I can speak to this from my own personal experiences, you know, being in corporate environments and not quite feeling like you fit in, and feeling like you're doing a lot of work and extending a lot of energy to fit in, on top of the demands of the job itself. So there's that kind of disconnection, that stress, you know, going to work every day, dealing with, you know, just maybe microaggressions, or, you know, people not quite understanding your perspective, being one of very few people who look like you in the room or in the entire building. It takes a psychological toll. Yes. And a lot of times we feel like we're pouring so much into these businesses and someone else's dream that it's like, wow, if I just took a fraction of this energy and invested it in myself, what are the possibilities?
Yeah.
And so I think that as more women were experiencing that, and then seeing other women, because now, because of social media, we're more visible, right? So at the time, like I said, when I created the blog, the story of the Black woman entrepreneur wasn't as visible, because we didn't have Instagram, you know, there weren't these stories being shared, you know, in the media. But once you start seeing more people doing something that you want to do, you understand that it's possible. And so that reputation, that representation is giving us the fuel to start our own businesses. Yeah. And so that's also one of the goals of the work I do. Like, I think about little brown girls, you know, like I grew up in Indiana, and I talk about this in the film, in a family of entrepreneurs, but they were all men. And so when I came to New York and, you know, just saw all of these creatives and these makers and these people who are building legacies, a lot of them were women that I admired. And so just seeing them do it made me feel like I could do it too. And that's what inspired me to leave my PR agency job and start my own consultancy. But like, that is part of what is driving these numbers. Like, we're seeing all around us people who are building businesses, and not necessarily, like I said, in fields that they studied in, but just fields that they're passionate about. And a lot of times that passion kind of outweighs the formal education if it's something that you are really committed to learning and like becoming an expert in.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and it's interesting that you say that, because it occurred to me, and we've known this because we do a lot of work in the women's space, and, you know, doing surveying and understanding what's going on with women. And generally, as women, we feel like we need that degree we feel like we need those credentials, the letters after our name, in
Right.
order to go and do something. And what I love about one of the points that you make in the film is you know, if you have a passion for something and you have an understanding of it, go forth and do it.
Right.
And you use this term in the film, feeling the fear. Feel the fear. Can you talk about what that means?
Feel the fear and do it anyway is really one of my life mantras. And, you know, when I think about the things I've done in my career, the things that have been most successful are the things that I was probably most fearful of. So, you know, even with this film, I had the, you know, like this feeling like I need to produce this film. You know, I have always been a huge fan of documentaries and business documentaries. And I was looking at documentaries on the topic of entrepreneurship, and Black women were just sprinkled in. We were never the focus, never the center of the stories. And when you look at, you know, the obstacles that Black women face, from lack of funding to, you know, just things happening in our community that could be a barrier to our success, our journey is very unique. And so I felt like we deserved an entire film dedicated to us and how we make these things happen, how we do that. And so I felt the fear, but to be quite honest, it wasn't a lot of fear because I just had so much support from my community. You know, I think the fear went away after I got my first yes from a subject. And I think, and if I remember correctly, that first yes was from Lovey Ajayi Jones, New York Times bestselling author. She actually was someone that I knew because she designed In Her Shoes 2.0 like years ago when she was a web designer. And so I literally watched her career, you know, catapult and go in all these different beautiful directions. And I knew that she was someone who I wanted to have in the film, just to show once again that you don't have to have a degree in this thing that you're passionate about, you know? And it's not to take anything away from formal education. You know, obviously there is tons of value in studying something, but I also think, especially now in the world that we live in, you can be successful in something if you didn't study it, because that real life, you know, on the job training is equally important and can take you pretty far.
Yeah, and one of the things that one of the women that you interviewed from the Lip Bar, she talks about her experience when she went on Shark Tank. She had her business. She brought on to Shark Tank, and was basically laughed out of the room. And I was so inspired by her response to that, and this idea that she was passionate about her business and she was going to stay with it anyway. And now she's in hundreds of Target stores across the country, and prove them wrong. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was also such an, you know, you brought that story to life, and I thought and making the point that you have to believe in yourself and what you bring to the table, and almost shut out the other voices. So I'm curious about, you know, your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, a lot of times when we look at, you know, because at the end of the day, their appearance on Shark Tank was so that they can get investors in their business. And what we're finding is that a lot of the people who are in those decision-making roles aren't necessarily the same people who understand the why behind your business.
Right.
And as a result, they're not going to understand how it could be profitable or, you know, even a success. So when you think about what they said, essentially they were saying that if these larger corporations wanted to make these wild colors and lipstick, they would have done it already. If they didn't do it already means that this isn't a viable idea. And so the beautiful thing about Melissa and her business partner, Wasco, is that they went on that show with this unwavering confidence, you know, in their idea, and just knowing who their target audience was and what they wanted. So the beautiful thing is that they were able to walk away from that still very clear on the fact that they had a powerful idea, and just like, okay, if you don't get it, it's fine. Someone else may get it. And if someone else gets it, it's okay, because we believe in ourselves. And the thing that's awesome about that experience they had on Shark Tank is that, like, their server went down because they had so much traffic, that moment put them in the public eye and gave them more visibility than they had before. So the lesson for that too, for me personally, is just reframing what we think could be a failure. In some people's eyes, they were a failure, but in fact, that appearance on Shark Tank kind of like pushed them out into the forefront. And I think it just really gave them the fuel that they needed to keep going and to continue believing in their idea, even if the investors on Shark Tank did not.
Yeah, I love that story. I think it is so instructive and useful for people to hear. I think women in particular, because, we are a little bit harder on ourselves when it comes to what we're trying to achieve. So I really appreciated that, you brought that story to life in the film. So what has been the response? Like, what, the movie's on Netflix. The film's on Netflix. Anybody who's got a Netflix account can go watch it. That's millions of people. What's the response been? How has this changed your life?
The response to the film has been incredible. It launched in February of 2020, but one thing a lot of people don't know, and understandably so, because Netflix is such a huge platform, the film actually had its like global premiere at Essence Festival summer of 2018. And so there was like a life for this film before it hit Netflix. I believed in it so much that, in partnership with some of our brands that aligned with us, we were just touring around the country and just sharing the film in rooms of 50, 100 people, 400 people, whoever wanted to come out and get the inspiration. And so with our distribution deal, and we didn't get that until, the film was maybe almost a year old. But with our distribution deal, the first round of distribution was with Amazon Prime, and it's still there. iTunes, all of the cable networks had it on their on-demand platform. And so that was awesome because finally I could say, after these live screening events, like, if you want to share this with your aunts, your sisters, your cousins, it could be found here. But when it hit Netflix, it was almost as if it didn't exist before, because people from around the world now had access to these women's stories. And you never really understand the reach of, a platform like Netflix until you're on it. Like the day that it premiered, like, my phone and my notifications have never been that busy. Like, I was like overwhelmed in the most positive way by the love. And the message that I kept getting from women was, wow, I finally feel seen. Because we live in a world where on social media, we're literally just sharing the highlight reel of our careers, of our lives, of our businesses. And a lot of entrepreneurs, especially the younger and newer entrepreneurs, you tend to compare your day one to someone's, 5th year in business. And when you're doing that, just scrolling through social, it's easy to feel like you're not winning, or, you're not doing something right, or the challenges that you're facing are unique to you. But after watching the film and seeing women like Elisa Price, who has been in business for over 2 decades now, and someone like a Lovey or Tanya, or Melissa share their stories, women now understand that, like, okay, these challenges that I'm facing on this entrepreneurial journey are not because I'm a failure, not because, I'm not going to be a success. It's part of the journey. And it's these are obstacles that I can overcome because these women were able to. And so that has been the most gratifying part of this experience, just helping women understand that entrepreneurship is probably the most challenging thing you'll ever do professionally. And it's not as glamorous as, it may seem. And so I feel like I had a responsibility as someone who has been an entrepreneur for some time, who has worked with countless entrepreneurs. I feel like it was my responsibility to the next generation to show the truth behind what this is. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Not an effort to scare anyone away, but just to kind of give a real look at what's involved,
Yeah, and it was very clear, just as, as a female entrepreneur myself, I watched the stories and felt like, yes, this finally somebody is talking about a lot of what is real in terms of this experience and what it's like. You talked about in the film, you guys cover the topic of the Superwoman Complex. Can you talk about what that is and what the implications are?
Sure. Well, the Superwoman Complex is a global, it's not limited to Black women. It is a global thing that women deal with. We are born nurturers and providers. That's just who we are. But a lot of times we lose ourselves in that need to nurture the people around us and provide for the people around us. And when you're an entrepreneur, you are wearing so many different hats, especially if you are still building your business. If you're in the startup stage, there's a good chance that you are the marketing person, the accounting person, the creative director. Like, you're wearing all of these hats, and you're keeping the balls up in the air, but like barely, and you're keeping those balls up in the air by sacrificing something. And a lot of times we're sacrificing ourselves, whether it's not getting enough rest or not, just pouring into ourselves, whether it's spiritually or emotionally. But we think we can do it all because we have been doing it all, right? And so that Superwoman Complex needed to be discussed because it is a huge part of entrepreneurship. Just because you can design an invitation doesn't mean that you should, and that's something that I've had to learn the hard way. There are a lot of things that I felt like I could do, but I needed to give to someone else so that I could kind of buy that time back and give it to myself. So one of the things that we discussed in the film, Ashaka Givens actually said this. Her advice was, for women to take the cape off. It's okay to take the cape off. You don't have to save everyone. You don't have to do all of the things. Take the cape off and pour into yourself. And that time that you step away from your business and step away from all of your other obligations and commit to yourself, it really just makes you even better in these roles, even better and stronger and more impactful as an entrepreneur, as a partner, as a lover, as a parent, as a wife. That time that we pour back into ourselves is so valuable. And I just want more of us to understand what it really means.
Yeah, and I think that was such an important topic to cover. I remember one of the women in the film talks about self-care and the importance of self-care. How do you think about that in your life? Because you are on this mission to share these women's stories, and you talk about that very passionately in the film. And it's obviously sort of a raison d'etre for you. It's like, sort of clearly something that is so important to you. That could be all consuming, right? So how do you think about self-care?
It is all consuming. And self-care for me, it kind of changes throughout the year, throughout my life, throughout my career. This time that we're in now is a very special time. And so self-care, a year ago for me may have been disconnecting and going on a vacation and like kicking my feet up and, stepping away from work. But now, because we don't have that freedom, Self-care it could be something as simple as putting my phone on do not disturb, stepping away from the news cycle, not to internalize, what's happening in the world. Reading a book, like there are so many just simple things that I'm getting back to now that I would define as self-care, taking a bath, regularly, and just doing things around my home that I didn't have time for, caring for my plants, taking my dog on extended walks, FaceTime with family. All of those things are self-care. And, it's not always, something like a face mask or things like that. From week to week, it could be something different. This week, self-care for me is looking like being committed to drinking as much water as possible, being committed to cooking nutritious meals in my home as opposed to getting on Seamless just because it's convenient. So it varies from week to week, but I'm committed to it, especially now when we have so much bad news and so much craziness, kind of being thrown at us from day to day. You pick up your phone and you could see anything happening right now, particularly as it pertains to, things that are happening against the Black community, things that are directly impacting women. So I make a concerted effort to disconnect regularly and pour into myself, escape through books, through films, through conversations with friends and loved ones. And that is what self-care looks like for me right now.
And it strikes me when I was watching the film and talking with you now, one of the words that just adjectives that about you that pops into my mind is brave. I mean, I think that it requires a certain amount of bravery to do what you're doing, because it can be, I'm sure, difficult and disheartening at times, but also requires so much of your energy and your thought to make it all happen. What were you like as a kid? Were you always this brave, determined person?
You know what? When I was a child, a couple of ways that my parents would describe me was nosy or inquisitive. I used to spend a lot of time up under my mother and her friends. And I think that is probably the early stages of my love for Black women, and just women across the board. I would be up under my mom and her friends a lot. I was an only child until I was 9. So I spent more time probably with adult women than with, kids my age. So I was very inquisitive. I asked a lot of questions, some things that I probably had no business knowing, but I've always been curious. And I think that curiosity is what fuels, the work I do now. From as long as I can remember, when people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grow up, which, when I look back on it, is such a horrible question to ask a child, because who knows what you want to be when you're that young. But I used to always say, I want to have my own business. And I didn't know what the business was, but literally just from seeing my grandfather and my father run their own businesses, I knew that it was possible. And so that is something that I always said. So when I think back on where I am now and who I was as a little brown girl growing up in the Midwest, those two things have literally just come to life right before my eyes and have really helped me to build this life and this career that I have now.
One of the things that that you talk about in the film and that I wanted to ask you about, we do a lot of surveying, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the things we found when we surveyed thousands of women is that the women generally, and about in the most recent study we did, over 60% of women told us that they don't feel supported by other women. And it was upsetting as a woman to see that, because the other thing that we saw was that the younger you were, the more likely you were to think that women were not supportive of you, that other women weren't supportive of you. It was actually the older women who felt more supported. So we aren't going in the right direction if it's the younger women who are feeling a lot this way.
Yeah.
And one of the points you make in the film is this point about collaboration. And I was so heartened that you covered this in the stories, because there is so much that the women who in the film talk about the value of collaborating with other women, not seeing them as competitors, and actually being supportive. Can you talk a little bit about that? And well, first of all, are you surprised by the stat that we uncovered that that over 60% of women feel that they aren't supported by other women? And then, how do you think, based on what you covered in the film and the value that the women saw in supporting one another, how do you think we might be able to change it?
So that is concerning because, from my personal experience and also in talking to other women, like, for example, my career would not be where it is right now if it weren't for the women who have supported my journey. When I think about job opportunities I've been able to secure, when I was younger, or even like the success of this film, it is all because women were just behind it. In one example, one kind of like analogy that I've used before, particularly as this film just continues to like have this life of its own, I visualize this film as like a ball or a balloon, and women are just pushing it up and like keeping it up in the air, just going. And so, like, when I think about the brand partnerships we've been able to secure, it is because a woman on the other side of the table believed in me and the work I was doing and the stories, that I'm sharing, and wanted to use her power in her corporate position to support it. Every single brand partnership I've been able to secure was because a woman believed in me in this project. Any opportunities that I've received have literally been because of a woman, not because of a man calling me. And it's not to say that men aren't supportive, but for me, the whole women supporting women movement and like hashtag is more than that. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so I would challenge people who feel like they're not supported by women to stop and look at themselves and question, are they supporting women? A lot of times we get in life what we put out, put out comes back to us. So how supportive are you of the women in your life? And if you're honest with yourself and you find that you're not that supportive, perhaps that's why you're not receiving support.
I love that. I have to tell you, I have asked so many women this question about the stat of, why women would feel this way. And I think you were the first person who has said, wait, maybe you should take a look at yourself and see, where do you think you are? And are you putting that energy out there? Are you the one that's being supportive? I think that is such great advice. What do you think your superpower is?
I think my superpower, and I don't think it's unique to me, I think it's unique to women across the board, and specifically like the Black women whose stories I share. My superpower is like making something out of nothing. A lot of the women that I have featured, whether it's on my blog or in my storytelling, are creating businesses and creating these successful brands with very few resources. When I thought about the idea of producing this film, again, I was not a trained filmmaker, had no experience behind the camera. And so there was kind of nothing there but this passion to tell these women's stories. And so to know that I started from nothing, basically, and now this film is on Netflix and is reaching people around the world, that is a superpower, especially when you think about, how many content creators there are out there, how many storytellers, how many people who have been at this for years.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I was able to create something that resonated
Mm-hmm.
with so many people is a beautiful thing. And so when I think about some of the biggest moments I've had in my career, it really goes back to creating something out of nothing. And that's a superpower.
Yeah. I love that, and it is such a gift to be able to do that. And I think though that it's multiple things that you've talked about. That the fact that you work your way through the fear. That there's multiple things that you've talked about that kind of support this ability that you have to create something from nothing. And what is next? What's next for you now? You've out of the gate, you've had this success with this film. What do you think you're going to do next?
I'm working on the next installation. It's been really exciting, but then also challenging for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But the place that we are now in the world, and the even bigger obstacles that women are overcoming now, continuing to build businesses in this environment we're in, has really been inspiration for more stories. So I'm working on the next installation. I can't say a lot about it because we're in, pre-production, like early development stages, but there is another project in the works. And I feel confident that it is going to be, even more successful, because we're in a time now where a lot of women and men are realizing that you have to have something of your own. Like we just saw the world change right before our eyes. Mm-hmm. And so now there is even more value in having your own business, even if it's a side hustle, even if it's just to create an additional stream of revenue. I think people are kind of understanding now the importance of having that to fall back on, and having that, additional way of supporting themselves and their families. So that's what I'm working on. And, hopefully there'll be another opportunity to come here and talk about the project when it's, ready to be shared with the world.
Well, we would love that. And if people want to follow you and follow your story, what is the best way that they can do that?
Sure. My personal Instagram is I am Renae Bluitt. And if you'd like to follow the film, and that is where I'll be sharing, updates and kind of just keeping the conversation going surrounding Black women entrepreneurs. The film's handle is She Did That Film.
Awesome. Well, Renae, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Congratulations on the success. And I cannot wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.